Good evening, everybody. My name is Clement Solomon. I have the privilege of leading the Intermodal Division offices of the Georgia Department of Transportation. Let me start by thanking you all for taking the time to join us today, especially given the circumstances we're all facing in the aftermath of the not one but two hurricanes. I'd like to acknowledge the incredible effort from many of you and your teams being involved in local recovery and rebuilding efforts, and some across the state. Just wanted to start by thanking you all as each of you involved in your different communities chose this evening to participate in this state rail plan stakeholder workshop during this challenging time, which is truly commendable. Despite these challenges, today's session will focus on the critical importance of state rail planning. As you may know, a well-functioning and a resilient rail system is essential for the economic health of our state, especially during times of crisis. Our rail network not alone supports the movement of goods and services, but also plays a vital role in recovery efforts by keeping supply chains open and ensuring timely deliveries of essential materials. I would like to remind us all that things have changed, especially since the pandemic. A lot of the transportation thinking in terms of supply chain, how we respond to certain issues, certain circumstances, have taught us to rethink how we plan transportation and how we deploy various modes into this new world of transportation. Our last rail plan was done around 2020 or 2021 time period, and I believe that this planning effort will be able to account for and respond to the changes since COVID. I hope that you find the state rail planning exercise allows us the time to this new reality to improve infrastructure, enhance safety, ensure long-term sustainability, both for passenger and freight rail. Your involvement in these discussions is key to ensuring a robust plan is developed, especially the point that I made, in terms of life has changed a lot since COVID, and that meets the needs of our communities in the near term and the future. So today's session will be an opportunity for us to connect virtually and continue this important work, while also recognizing that many of us are managing additional priorities at this time. I sincerely thank you all for being here and look forward to a productive collaborative session. I understand that we had some in-person workshop planned, and we couldn't do that. Our apologies for not making that happen. However, we think that this virtual meeting would still be a great way for us to connect. And with that, I would welcome you all to this event. It is a long process. This is just the beginning. We will hear some conversations and discussion on what we're planning to do during this 1 hour period. And I will let the rest of the team take over from here, and I will hand it back to you, Sabrina or Phil, whoever is on next on the agenda. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Solomon. So good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Peavy, and I'm the Planning and Environmental Manager for the Division of Intermodal and the GDOT Project Manager for this project. So today's meeting will be collaborative with a series of activities designed to gather your feedback on a variety of topics, including objectives, rail needs, and project identification. We appreciate your interest and involvement. Your input is critical to the 2025 State Rail Plan update, and we look forward to receiving your comments. This slide will give you a quick overview of today's agenda. First, we're going to give you some information on the Georgia State Rail Plan itself. Then we have an activity plan where we'll go over the planning objectives. Then we'll look at the freight and passenger rail in Georgia. Then we have another activity planned where you'll be able to put recommended projects on the statewide rail map. And then we'll cover some of the next steps of the process itself. Now, our objectives today are pretty straightforward. First, we're going to introduce the Georgia State Rail Plan. We'll provide a brief overview of its purpose, approach, and schedule so you'll know what to expect from the planning process. Then we'll discuss the draft project list. We'll review the current draft of rail projects, ensure it captures all relevant initiatives and priorities. Then we'll gather feedback on the plan's objectives. We're looking for your input on the state rail plan's goals, objectives, and vision to make sure it aligns with Georgia's needs. And then finally, we'll collect your input on challenges and opportunities. We'll ask for your insights on current and future challenges, opportunities, and priorities for rail service in the state. You can also drop any questions related to the planning process into the Q&A for feature of this meeting. Now, for questions related to the outcome of the plan, we'll make sure to capture them and incorporate them the best we can. Later in this meeting, we'll ask you through specific ways to provide feedback, including an online comment map. We strongly encourage you to use the map to provide feedback that you want considered in the planning process. Your feedback today is essential in shaping the future of Georgia's rail network, and we appreciate your time and insights. So throughout today's meeting, we'll use Mentimeter's polling software to get your feedback. So please go ahead and scan the QR code or go to the website and access the code on the screen. Now, once you're in, share with us who is in the virtual room today. Now, I'll give you a couple of minutes to add your information before moving on to the next slide.
I see a few of you have joined. And I'll put that QR code back up if you'd like to grab that, or just go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. And we're just asking who is in the room, if you can just share your organization name.
All right, responses are coming in. So there's GDOT. Oh, we're good. Okay. Glad we got a few GDOT folks on there. And HNTB, Atlanta Regional Commission, great. All right, so I do know there are more people in the chat that have responded, so y'all keep responding, and I'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next slide. Thanks, everyone, for signing up here. So Georgia's goal for its multimodal transportation system, including rail, are outlined in the Georgia Statewide Strategic Transportation Plan, also known as SSTP. Now, these goals align with the mission and vision set by Governor Kemp and the Georgia Department of Transportation, and they also meet federal legislation requirements. Now, the mission is clear: deliver a transportation system focused on innovation, safety, sustainability, and mobility. The vision: to boost Georgia's competitiveness through leadership in transportation. Now, Governor Kemp's strategic goals and GDOT's priorities for the multimodal system include: make Georgia #1 for small business, reform state government, strengthen rural Georgia, and then finally, put Georgians first. Now, these goals are part of a unified effort to enhance Georgia's transportation network, making it a leader in mobility, safety, and innovation. Now, with these next two slides, I'll be outlining the different types of rail service. Now, the first slide covers passenger rail. First, we have rail transit. Now, this is all-day frequent service. It serves usually more dense urban areas. Services are based on headways, basically the time between repeated trains. They have a lot more stations and they're closer together. And then this type of service is regulated and funded by the Federal Transit Administration. Next, we have commuter rail. Now, this usually services major metropolitan regions, and sometimes it can serve more than one region if they're close together. It provides daily access for workers between the suburbs and the city center during peak commute times. It has a lot of stations, not as many as the rail transit, and the stations are still closer together. And then this one's also regulated and funded by the Federal Transit Administration. And then finally, we have long distance passenger, intercity passenger rail. Now, this serves long distance trips and connects multiple major cities. Stations are spaced further apart to preserve higher speeds and faster travel times. And this type of service is regulated by the Federal Rail Administration. So it differs from the other two in a number of ways. With this next slide, we have freight rail. Now, it covers first Class 1, and Class 1 provides long-distance freight services and serves as a backbone to North America's rail network. They operate major rail yards, serve ports, and connect directly to major industries. There are 6 Class 1 freight railroads in North America, with 2 of them operating in Georgia. And then finally, we have the short line railroads. Now, these provide first mile, last mile connectivity to the rail system, connect smaller industries with lesser service needs to the Class 1 networks, support economic development in rural Georgia, and there are over 25 short lines in Georgia. Now, this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Kevin Keller, who's going to give you an overview of the state rail plan itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Again, I'm Kevin Keller. I am the consultant team project manager, assisting Clement and Phil and the team for the state rail plan update. I'm with HDR Engineering. I direct our intermodal transportation practice, which includes passenger rail, freight rail, port and maritime, and aviation. We do a lot of these state rail plans. Again, it's our pleasure to be working with GDOT on this. I just want to give everybody an overview of what the rail plan process is all about. But again, thanks to all of you for being here this evening. The biggest part of putting together a rail plan is getting this crucial input from stakeholders like y'all. So again, I appreciate it. You know, as the state of Georgia makes their strategic investments in its rail infrastructure, it's really important to document as much as we can what's been done to date in the state for rail, what needs are currently there for rail in the state, and putting together a plan to address those needs in a short term and a long term in the future. Next slide. So how do we do this? We start looking at the actual role of rail in the statewide transportation plan, right? As you just saw from Phil, there's Class 1 railroads, and there's 2 big Class 1 railroads in the network, obviously served by CSX and Norfolk Southern. By far, that's the bulk of the rail mileage in the state. However, there's also what we call short line railroads, and there's 26 of them in the state of Georgia. Together, those are over 1,000 miles of rail track in the states. Above and beyond that, there's also 4 daily Amtrak routes serving Georgia: the Crescent, the Palmetto, the Silver Meteor, and the Silver Star. So I just want to work through what actually is the rail plan process itself. So on this slide, you can kind of see some of the bullets that we're headed for this. You know, it's a rail plan is a process. Like you heard from Clement, this isn't a short process. It usually takes about a year to develop and finalize the state rail plan. And there's a couple of federal requirements for rail plans. So why do we do them? We basically do them because we try to update these state rail plans every 4 years. As you can see from the federal citations there, the FAST Act changed every 5 years to every 4 years. But maybe the most critical part of this, besides actually having a rail service investment plan for the state, is that having an accepted state rail plan by the Federal Railroad Administration makes you competitive for federal grant money. Very, very critical for this stage. So how do we do this? There's 4 basic inputs where we really want to have this collaboration. We've been using that word a lot, and it really is a collaborative process. We want to engage the stakeholders, which is all of you, to really help us inform what those rail priorities need to be. We want to evaluate the existing rail infrastructure that we have, and then identify the needs for potential projects, right, that can enhance that existing infrastructure. We want to provide that clear communication. This is a very transparent process, right? Again, you are a big part of the process. We want to make sure that you are a part of the process. And finally, we want to gain insights into what are those challenges and what are those priority needs that the rail industry has so that we can better address them in an updated rail plan. The FRA, way back in September of 2013, actually put together guidance on what a state rail plan should have in it in terms of content. You can see on the slide there's 6 main pieces of a state rail plan. Number one is what is the role of rail in the state of Georgia? Number 2, what's the existing rail system look like? What should it look like? What could it look like? 3 is, based on that, what passenger rail improvements and investments may be required in the state. The next one is what improvements and investments should be made in the freight rail part of the rail network in the state. That all culminates in a chapter called the State's Rail Service and Investment Program. And that's where, pardon the pun, where the steel meets the steel. That's where we line out a short-term program of needs for both passenger rail and freight rail in the state, and a long-term need for rail infrastructure in the state. Then finally, what we want to do with this Chapter 6 coordination review is document all the feedback, all the input that we've gotten from you. It's really important that we show your input, that we listen to your input, and reflect that in the updated rail plan. So what are some of the plan objectives? So it's really important to note that, we just don't start from scratch. As you heard from Phil earlier, Georgia DOT has had a very robust rail program over the years. So we're not starting from scratch. What we've done is we've carefully adapted these objectives to meet these future needs and challenges. We always, of course, start with safety. Safety is always number one for the rail industry, as you all know. So we want to make sure that this updated rail plan shows that we're championing safety of both passengers and the goods being moved on the freight rail lines. And we want to ensure that those rail operations meet the security and the reliability standards that we should be meeting. We want to make sure that rail in the state of Georgia is as efficient as it can be. To help that efficiency move forward, we want to share what we're doing on the state level with the rail operators, with the rail shippers, with the consumers, to really try to optimize the use of these rail assets and really improve the overall system performance. We want to make the rail infrastructure accessible, right? Especially to those currently underserved communities. We want to provide freight rail access to these key industrial centers in the state, especially those areas of the state that this could serve as a huge economic development lift. And we want to make sure that we have equitable options for transportation across the state. Again, it's all about unlocking those new opportunities, right? Finally, it's about economic competitiveness. We want to leverage the power of Georgia's, not just the rail network, but everything that we have with Georgia, moving goods to markets, bringing in those commodities that drive future growth in the state. So it's a two-way street for how can rail help make the citizens and companies in the state of Georgia more competitive in a global market. It's very important. So what have we done so far? So far, we have done a series of interviews. We have interviewed the Class 1 railroads, CSX and Norfolk Southern. We've interviewed some of the larger owned short line railroads in the state. What we're hearing so far is freight rail volumes continue to grow. A big driver of that is the activity on the port side. Georgia Port Authority's growth has just been incredible over the past several years. That's not going to slow down, but that's also driving growth in other sectors in the state. we want to make sure that rail grows along with it. Short lines are continuing to look for funding opportunities to improve their infrastructure. A state rail plan can really enhance those short lines' ability to pursue those federal funds to help improve their infrastructure. And finally, shippers. Shippers across the state, they want a more reliable, a more sustainable, more resilient mode of transportation to move their goods to market. Obviously, rail meets that definition right on. We want to make sure that we understand what those shippers' needs are, and again, that we can address them in this update of the rail plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina. We're going to have our first exercise or activity with Menti. So Sabrina, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you. So if you all are still in the Mentimeter, I'll just go ahead and change it and you'll be able to answer this question. And so I'll tab back to the full screen and the definitions for each of these in just a moment. But the question is, how well do you feel these statements capture your objectives for the state rail plan? And I'll ask you in a minute what you think is missing. But from a scoring standpoint, kind of strongly disagree to strongly agree, how well do these buckets capture kind of what you feel really represent your own objectives for a state rail plan? And I'll tab back to the presentation momentarily so you can kind of read those up on the screen. And I can see on my end as you guys start to add a little bit. So the safety, championing industry's highest priority, the efficiency, partnering with rail operators to identify opportunities, accessibility, expanding and improving passenger rail service to access to underserved communities, and then the economic competitiveness, leveraging the power of Georgia's rail network to drive economic growth. Got about 5 of you all in. I'll just put the QR code back up there quickly for those of you if you want to grab that. But again, you can just go to menti.com and type in 62727380. And I'll actually ask if our team can drop the link directly to that in the chat too. Economic competitiveness and efficiency, rating the highest, safety and accessibility. So with that being said, I think we've got 10 folks have answered the question. Thank you. So this is an open-ended, what, if anything, is missing from these objectives? What do you all feel you did not see in those objectives that you want to make sure is considered through this planning process? And again, I'll just quickly tab back to those key objectives so you can kind of read those, but the question should have automatically changed. And if you're having any issue utilizing the Mentimeter, you can also just drop your conversation in the chat. And we'll make sure we capture it there as well. So we've got in so far modal shift, high-speed rail, resiliency.
Yeah, one of the parameters we definitely want to look at in the update is modal shift. Obviously, with a lot of the actions here going through emissions reduction and climate resiliency, we definitely want to address modal shift. So I think that's a really good one to look at. Grade crossing elimination is another good one. Obviously, with all the grade crossing elimination grant programs going on, we want to make sure that we have a really good inventory of grade crossings in the states, as well as getting some input from you. And you might have an opportunity to do that in our next map exercise that we'll hear in a minute, is what grade crossings maybe to you are especially important to improve, modify, eliminate, separate. So we definitely want to hear that. I see coordination with other states, equally important. Absolutely. I see high-speed rail. We'll get to that in a little bit in this presentation, actually. So I think those are all good. Resiliency, obviously, is very important. Very good. Good comments. Thank you.
Perfect. So we've got one more question here to ask you all. And again, you can continue to leave comments here in the chat, as well as we'll offer some opportunities to, if you want to think about it and add some comments later. Got another one in there. But the last question is, in 2050, what are the tangible examples a resident or visitor would give to show that we reached our objectives? So, you know, in 2050, what would you visually see within the state that shows that we did hit those objectives? So let you guys take a couple moments to answer that question. I'll just quickly tab back to the key objectives themselves: safety, efficiency, accessibility, and economic competitiveness. They're kind of your little full statements. Statewide passenger rail network, passenger rail access to and from Central Georgia, increased freight velocities, high-speed rail connection between Savannah and Atlanta. Shift. Yes. All right.
Very good. Again, really good comments.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to tab back to the presentation, but this is still collecting comments, so you can still continue to add as Kevin continues.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. Again, really good comments. And that's what we really want out of these sessions is, what are your thoughts? What is it that you want from this rail plan update? These plans don't just sit on a shelf, right? We want them to be implementable. So everything you can do to help us with that is appreciative. So again, I'm going to turn it over to two of our team's subject matter experts. As you saw from the outline before, we have two modes that we really try to focus on. Obviously, at the end of the day, it's part of the overall state rail network. But in the context of the rail plan, we talk about freight rail and those freight rail infrastructure needs and improvement opportunities. And then we do the same thing for passenger rail. So we're going to start with an overview of freight rail. Stefano Miranda from HDR is going to walk us through freight rail. Matt Van Hattem, also with HDR, is going to walk us through the passenger rail section. So Stefano, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Stefano Miranda, HDR, Senior Transportation Planner. So real quick, Georgia, as we all know, is a crucial node in the national rail logistics system, and Atlanta, Georgia being a major hub for freight rail in the United States and overall. So let's quickly look at the numbers here. Freight rail is vital to Georgia's economy, carrying over 158 million tons of goods in 2022. Rail represents the backbone of Georgia's transportation network, especially for critical industries like chemical, mixed shipments, coal, food, and non-metallic minerals. Interestingly enough, about half of that freight, over 70 million tons, doesn't even originate or end in Georgia. Just highlighting how vital Georgia rail network is for interstate and international trade, especially with the Port of Savannah, with much of that just passing through there. Over time, the types of commodities moved by rail are changing. We have noticed that while coal once a dominant player, it continues to decline due to shifts in energy productions nationally. Other products like textile, rubber, plastics, and non-metals minerals are poised for solid growth, while annual increase are projected to be up to 4% by 2050. Freight rail does not only move these goods, but also plays a massive role in the economy, supporting over 200,000 jobs and contributing to more than 51 billion in economic output annually for the state. Georgia's freight rail network is a crucial component of our economy, and with the projected growth in certain commodities, its importance will only increase to the national logistics system. To ensure that it continues to be a key driver of development, strategic planning and investment in rail infrastructure are essential. This will not only help meet the growing demands, but also ensure that Georgia remains a critical link in the national supply chain. Thank you. And now looking at the Code of Georgia 32-41.3, it established the Georgia Freight Rail Program, which is designed to bolster Georgia's rail network by enhancing state investment in freight rail for public benefit. Funding is subject to annual appropriations through the legislature and will be available to Class 1s and short lines Class 3s operators that provide freight rail service within the state. The Georgia Freight Rail Program was developed to promote investment in rail freight, with about 67% of program revenue distributed to Class 1 operators and the remaining 33% distributed to the short line railroads. Under the Georgia Freight Rail Program, projects are implemented under MOUs between the involved parties. These projects include capital and construction maintenance projects on those freight rail assets. Funds from the program are allocated following an evaluation of the projects based on their merit and considerations determined by the commissioner. Some of the public benefits include enhanced public safety, enhanced mobility of goods, congestion relief, reduction in block crossings, as some of you had mentioned that as one of the needs previously in the Menti, which is perfect, and then as well as air quality and land use improvements, increased economic development opportunities for the area surrounding the improvements, and reduction of public expenditures due to improved transportation efficiency and infrastructure preservation. So just quickly highlighting before going to the next slide, per the fiscal year 24 Georgia Freight Rail Program projects, which you may also find online on the GDOT webpage, a total of $10.8 million has been awarded to 6 projects with $23.9 million total project costs. Roughly 45% of that cost is being footed by the state. And just one quick example of a type of project on the Class 1 side, NS has received about $8.4 million from the state on a $21 million project for capital improvement for passing track improvements in McDonough, Henry County. Next slide, please. Perfect. And now we'll briefly touch on those project categories of the program. And where several existing projects have already been identified, these projects are categorized into those 4 key areas you see on your screen. Capital projects, which are large-scale investments aimed at expanding and upgrading the rail infrastructure to meet future demand and increase capacity. Then you have bridge projects. These focus on maintaining and improving rail bridges, ensuring they remain safe and reliable for both freight and passenger traffic in the state. Then you have safety initiatives. These projects are designed to enhance the safety of rail operations and their interactions with the general public. These projects are focused on addressing key concerns such as at-grade crossing improvements by enhancing the signal warning devices and removing vehicle and train interactions with increasing the overall operational safety and security of the railroad operations. And then finally, you have rehabilitation projects. These involve the repair and restoration of existing rail lines, ensuring the continued reliability and efficiency of Georgia's freight rail network. So these categories represent the core areas where the state is focusing its efforts to strengthen its freight rail system and overall, which improves the national freight system. These projects align with the state's long-term transportation goals. So we'll quickly move over to the projects that the state are looking at from the short line perspective for fiscal years 24 through 28. Most of these 25, the few that are 24 will be CRISI applications that are pending review by the FRA and an award announcement either later this year or early next year. Now, as I said 3 slides ago, actually, at the beginning of the freight program, these projects are always pending on annual allocations by the state legislature. So real quick, high level, we're looking at CCKY projects here. You have bridge, capital, and safety projects. These are in the works as opportunities. And really on the bridge side, it's bridge component replacement, strengthening, capital is rail ties and turnout improvements. And then on the safety side, you have crossing upgrades at about 50 miles distance range along their corridor. And then on the next slide, we're looking at DWSR projects. In the pipelines, they have bridge, capital, and safety improvements, similar to the previous one, bridge component replacement, strengthening, rail ties and turnout improvements on the capital side, and then grade crossing updates, ranging about 70 miles of their entire corridor. And then HOG projects, a little similar. You have your bridge projects, your capital projects, and the safety projects here. Thank you. And now you have your CPR and SA line projects, capital projects, rehab, and safety. The one main difference here with the rehab is drainage and pipe work at 8 different locations, siding improvements in Sylvania, and then tie renewal between about 30 miles along their corridor. And the safety project would be a grade crossing upgrade at State Road 21. And then now we're looking at the CPR V-line projects. The first I'd like to highlight is a recent Chrissy Grant Award for fiscal year 24 along the CPR V-line. It is a mix of capital, bridge, and safety work, amounting a total cost of just under 12.4 million, 5.3 million coming from the state shares, and then the federal share is just over 7 million. And I believe lastly here we have the GNRR projects, to highlight capital maintenance of rail track and switch ties, ballast and surfacing of a magnitude about 1.4 million, and then safety for fencing and security. And now with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Matt Van Hanem, to discuss passenger rail.
Thanks, Stefano. Yeah, so I'm Matt Van Hanem with HDR, and I'll be talking about the passenger rail projects that we're going to highlight in the Georgia State Rail Plan. So we can go to the next slide. So a lot of this stems from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which created several new federal programs to expand intercity passenger rail service across the country. So we're going to look at 2 of the programs that are really laying the early groundwork for possible future expansions of passenger rail service in Georgia. These programs are federally driven, and the first one we're going to talk about is the Corridor Identification and Development Program. And someone had already mentioned Corridor ID program in the chat. This is kind of well known around the country now as a passenger rail possible incubator for new services. So this was a program that was established to become really the primary means for directing federal financial support and assistance towards the development of new or improved intercity passenger rail service throughout the United States. The Federal Railroad Administration selected 69 corridors for this program, and these corridors are going to now go through a uniform step-by-step planning process, and that includes preparing a service development plan, which is the blueprint for how the passenger rail corridor is going to be built and operated. And that's followed by an environmental evaluation following NEPA guidelines and requirements, and then preliminary engineering. And so after completing all of that planning and environmental and engineering work through the Corridor ID program, corridors that are then ready for implementation can move into final design and construction. And they'll use funding from other federal programs to start building out and operating a possible new corridor. So among the corridors selected for this program, there were 3 in Georgia, and then a 4th that's near Georgia, as you can see on the screen. And GDOT is the sponsoring agency for one of the corridors shown, and that's the Atlanta to Savannah corridor. And it's important to note that GDOT actually started the planning work for this corridor even before the federal program was announced. And that study is going to evaluate several possible route alternatives between the two cities, which is why you see it represented on the slide by a green shaded area and not an actual line or an alignment. That study is going on now, and it will include opportunities in the future for public comment specifically on that study during separate meetings that GDOT is going to schedule. You can go, there's a GDOT webpage for this corridor study that you can access for more details. And in addition to that route, GDOT's worked with other states on previous studies that have laid a foundation for the planning work that's occurring now on some of the other corridors that you see on the screen. And that includes an award to North Carolina DOT, which will continue studying a new passenger rail corridor from Atlanta to Charlotte, North Carolina, and also the award to the city of Chattanooga, which is going to study a corridor from Atlanta to Chattanooga and then beyond to Nashville and Memphis, Tennessee. And then also nearby, Florida DOT received a Corridor ID award to study improvements to passenger rail service from Jacksonville down to Orlando and Miami. So that's one of the federal programs underway. And now we can go to the next slide and talk about the FRA long distance study. So this is something else that came out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It required the FRA to conduct an Amtrak daily long distance service study. And the purpose of that study is to evaluate the restoration of daily long distance passenger trains across the US. Some of those were discontinued 45 years ago and they ran through Georgia. And this study is also going to look at potential new Amtrak long distance routes. So let's drill down a little bit. Phil already explained that intercity passenger rail service includes both long distance trains and shorter distance routes. So what are long distance routes? Those are the routes, the Amtrak routes that are over 750 miles in length. And these are the types of trains that serve Georgia right now. They connect a mix of different urban and rural areas over one really very long corridor. And they typically operate one trip per day in each direction. And what's unique about these trains is that Amtrak receives the annual financial support from Congress to fund the operating costs associated with long distance trains. Any Amtrak routes that are shorter than 750 miles require the states to provide the funding for the service. But these long distance trains are a federal responsibility. And so what the FRA long distance service study is intended to do is really create a foundation for further planning out of potential new long distance routes and services, which would then be funded by Congress. So this study began last October, and it included a series of regional meetings held all around the country with different stakeholders. And from those meetings, a group of 15 new long distance routes were identified. And these routes are called the preferred routes in the study. And 3 of those routes serve some part of Georgia, as you can see on the screen. And then there's a 4th route as well that goes through the Florida Panhandle in close proximity to Georgia. Now, this study is going to wrap up by the end of the year. And after that, any further efforts to continue the planning or development of these preferred route options are going to require additional federal funding. And as of right now, there's no financial support for any future stages for that project. So now let's go to the next slide. And what this map shows you are the short range and long range passenger rail projects that will be highlighted in the Georgia State Rail Plan. So that includes the Corridor ID studies that we talked about a little bit earlier, and it also includes some plans that Amtrak has to improve its existing services in the state. And those really involve making all of the passenger rail stations in Georgia fully accessible and compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. But, we've talked about this. This rail plan presentation is also intended to solicit feedback from you. And that includes comments you may have about the projects we've talked about so far. And we also want to hear about other ideas you have that you'd like to see explored in the plan. And so that's going to take us to our next slide. So we're going to have our second interactive activity. And what we're going to do is walk you through our rail map activity. And we've mapped out the projects that we've talked about tonight on the freight and passenger side. And so on our next slide, what you're going to see is a map of Georgia. And that will include all of the freight and passenger projects on it. So let's go to that slide now. And so this is where we're going to start our interactive activity. So what we want you to do is, look at the current Georgia rail network that you see here. Look at the projects that are planned and that we've talked about, the passenger projects and the freight projects, and kind of see if it captures all of the latest updates that you're aware of. And you'll be able to leave your feedback and your comments through the provided link. And that's going to give you the option to comment both on the project we've talked about or other projects you want to see, or just leave general feedback. And one of the things we'd like to do is, as you review the map, tell us, any projects that are underway that might not be represented on the map or in the plan so far, any places that are rail bottlenecks or locations with operational constraints that you think should be considered. Any needed freight or passenger rail improvements that you'd like to see. We talked about grade crossings as one example. And then any economic development opportunities that the plan ought to take into account. So Sabrina is going to explain to us how you can participate interactively and leave your comments on the map. So I'll turn it over to Sabrina now.
Perfect. I just dropped a link into the chat for you all, and we will follow up in an email with the access to this link, and it will be available on GDOT's website for the State Rail Plan. But I want to walk everyone through just how to utilize this map so you all have that opportunity. So when you first click on the link, you'll get straight to the map, and it'll just ask you if you understand kind of how the purpose, which is to leave your comments, and you can go ahead and launch the app. And down here at the bottom of the map itself, you'll see a little pencil. That'll allow for you to go ahead and add a public comment. You can drop that anywhere on the map. You can also type in an address if you want to drop to a specific area. And all the projects that were just discussed are on the map for your reference to be able to see. So you can drop that anywhere. We just ask for you to leave email, which is optional, stakeholder identification to kind of so we can understand just the groupings that we have, your comment type, which is underway, existing bottleneck, economic development opportunities or areas with needed rail improvements, or just a general other feedback. And then you can just go ahead and leave your comment and create that on the map. If you have a comment that's not necessarily based on a specific intersection or rail line, just a general comment, you can also just leave that anywhere on the map too, or maybe in the area that you're coming from. And we'll collect all of those as well. And so you all should be able to access that link. If anyone's having any, just go ahead and drop something in chat. I'll make sure you get access to it. We're also going to, again, follow up via email so everyone has that link and is able to add comments directly to the map. And this will be open for the next several weeks so that we can continue to collect your feedback, but specifically your map-based feedback so we know exactly where a specific intersection would be. There is also a legend, so you can kind of see just a little bit of what each of these lines mean. If you click on any of the existing projects, you'll see a little bit of information about each one, so you'll know a little bit more about that particular project. And then also, if you ever need to go back to the instructions, that's here as well to walk you through how to leave a map comment. So again, you can type in your address or a place, it'll take you directly there. You can also hit the home button to kind of zoom back out. And then all you just need to do is hit public comment, drop it anywhere on the map. It'll update for you, and then just fill in anything here, and we'll be collecting all of those throughout the process. So I hope this will be a great opportunity or an easy way for everyone to provide their direct feedback to either location or generally how they would like to be considered for the state rail plan.
And Sabrina, I would add, this is Kevin, I would just add anything goes. There's no right, there's no wrong. We want to get as much input as we can from all of you. If it's a passenger station project somewhere, fine. If it's a grade separation or an at-grade closure project, fine. If it's some kind of a new freight corridor, fine. So there's no rules, but we really do want to get as much detail from you as we can. So just don't drop that little that little icon on the little thing on the map. We really want to have a description so that we can include that in the rail plan update. It's really important. So as much detail as you can give us is appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. And you'll also see as other folks are dropping things on the map, you'll be able to see that there are additional comments. You won't necessarily see who is who's left that comment, or what exactly they said, but you will be able to see at least the kind of general tone of those comments and specifically. And I can already see that there's at least 3 comments that have started to drop. So I appreciate you all jumping right in. And you can also take some time to think about that and forward that to others so that they can also add their comments as well. I'm going to tap back to our presentation. Again, that'll be going in the background. You all can continue to review and go through that. And if there's any questions about the specifically how to use that particular tool, I can help you on that. But then we'll pass it back to Philip, talk a little about the schedule, and then we'll do a Q&A.
Great, thanks, Sabrina. So here's a brief overview of the schedule. Now if you go to the next slide, please. Now this gives you just an idea of the 6 rail chapters that we'll be working on, the draft and final plan due dates, and then the stakeholder engagement activities. Now our goal is to complete the rail plan during the first quarter of 2025, with the final plan being posted on the GDOT website, the GDOT State Rail Plan website when it's completed. Now, a couple more things just to wrap up the presentation. So we will leave the public comment map up, like Sabrina was saying, for the next month to continue gathering feedback. Now, this will allow everyone to take their time reviewing the current Georgia Rail network and provide further insights. If you know of others who would like to contribute, we encourage you to share the map with them. In addition to the map, we'll also be posting a recording of today's session online, along with instructions on how to leave comments on our website. Now, this will make it easier for anyone that couldn't attend today to stay engaged and offer their thoughts. Then there'll be a final draft of the state rail plan that will be made available on the website for review and comment sometime during the first of the year. And then finally, I'd like to say we appreciate your time today, and we encourage you to stay involved by visiting the map, sharing it with your networks, and attending the next session. So I want to thank you all for attending the stakeholder workshop and sharing your input. Now, this will help us shape the 2025 Georgia State Rail Plan. In the coming days, we'll share the notes from this meeting with you, and we look forward to your continued involvement and input. Again, thank you for your participation today, and please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions or comments. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. So I think we'll have a couple minutes here for any questions about the planning process. Any questions that are going to be specific to elements of the plan itself, we'll capture all of those and make sure that they're incorporated into the overarching feedback. But I think we do have a couple questions, Philip, just in regards to the process itself. If we could maybe just answer a few of those. The first one being for the forms of passenger rail considered, we are seeing traditional commuter rail systems transitioning to a more regional rail type system that is more focused on all day bidirectional service. How is the planning effort incorporating lessons learned from those transitions?
Yeah, what we're going to do, we're going to look at past studies, and then we're going to look at and then we're also looking at the comments and the information provided by any of our stakeholders attending these meetings, and we'll try to incorporate as much information as we can into the passenger rail piece.
Perfect. And I think if we have any comments just specifically about commuter rail, just generally, and any considerations around commuter rail. Philip, sorry, I don't know if you froze. There we go. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, I was saying just there was just a general question about commuter rail. I guess maybe if there's any comments around how commuter rail is considered through the process.
I mean, we're looking at the past studies that were conducted on commuter rail. There is the Atlanta Savannah study that is being conducted separately, but it's not far enough along to really provide any major input into this study. So it will be referenced, but we won't really be able to, do a detailed analysis through this process. But we will look at commuter rail, and we also will take in again any recommendations that any of the stakeholders have related to commuter rail.
Perfect. And I see a hand raised from Jason.
Thank you, Sabrina. not to be the dead horse on this, but it is very worrying the lack of commuter rail material that's been presented tonight. Speaking as a stakeholder, as a City of Atlanta resident, as someone who does not own a car, we need something. And I encourage you not just to look at the past GDOT studies regarding commuter rail. As the question said earlier, in a post-COVID world, we are transitioning away from a traditional commuter rail model. A lot of agencies are transitioning away, and that's how they are seeing successes. So I encourage y'all to go look outside of our sphere, go look at some of the work that is happening, in Boston, in Chicago, and some of these other major metro areas, hell, even down in Orlando, right, with Sunrail. There's some really good examples, some really good modern systems that we could take lessons from.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jason. All right. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or anything else in the chat specifically. So again, I want to thank everyone. We will be following up with an email that's going to have more links, a direct link to the map that we just shared, as well as the recording for this session, if you'd like to rewatch or go to any specific sections. And then we'll be following up with more opportunities for engagement and feedback on this planning process. So with that, thank you all, and you have a great night. Let's Philip, you have any final words?
No, just thank everybody for coming. We appreciate your feedback. Like I said, you're going to have opportunities to provide feedback for at least another 30 days. So please go in, tell us what you're thinking. There's a couple of different ways you'll be able to do it. We'll have this information up in a couple of days, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.